Hello and welcome to Insights from Elsewhere podcast. My name is Cynthia Portugal. I'm Brazilian and I live in São Paulo, Brazil. I'm the growth director at Insight Platforms. Insight Platforms is an online media business that helps researchers find new tools, learn how to use them, and see what's coming next in the industry. We host a directory, we run conferences, create content, all for insights professionals around the world. And we created this podcast to go beyond the big markets of North America and Western Europe. We are going to take a look and talk to professionals, insights professionals from Latin, Asia, Africa, and elsewhere to find out how they are doing research, what's their experience with research technology, how they influence back their headquarters with their local nuances, and we will learn a lot of curiosities about those regions too. Today, I'm going to talk to Dave McCaughan. I hope I pronounced it right. He is actually born in Sydney, but based in Bangkok, Thailand. Dave has worked in the Asia Pacific region for the past 3 decades in senior management roles, especially with McCann, one of the biggest comms and advertisement agencies in the world. Over the years, he's been helping marketeers understand the relationships between people, brands, and media on Asia. Welcome to Insights from Elsewhere, Dave. It's a pleasure to have you with me today.
It's great to be here. And it's great that we can do this from almost exactly opposite sides of the world. I think if we dug that tunnel straight through the world from Sao Paulo, you'd just about hit Bangkok.
Yes, that's true.
That's true. What a great city
we're
Sao
close. We're close then.
And I have to say, I've been lucky enough to go to Sao Paulo half a dozen times and always loved it. Great place.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how did you get into market research, Dave? Like insights?
Okay, so bit of a long story. I started off life after high school, a job at the local public library and stayed for 10 years. So all through my late teens and 20s, I was working as a children's librarian in Western Sydney in public libraries. I did a couple of degrees at night while I was doing that. At the end of 10 years, like a lot of Australians, Australia is a very strange country. We have a law which says that no matter who you work for, government, private, if you work 10 years for the same organisation, they have to give you what's called long service leave, which is a bonus 3 months leave. So you'll find a lot of young Australians, when they hit that 10-year mark, just quit and go travelling for as long as the money lasts. I did that for about a year, ended up in Rome, worked as a butler in Rome for a year, bit strange. Went back to Australia and I was getting close to 30 and decided, look, this children's librarian's gig doesn't pay a lot of money, need a better job. And by accident, literally by accident, a friend of mine rang me one day and said, Dave, you looking for a new job? Yeah. Go to the Sydney Morning Herald, the main paper of Sydney, page 17, bottom right-hand corner. There was a little square wanted ad that said, wanted, American company with 5 Australian offices needs somebody to explain Australia to them. Phone Amanda at this number. That's all it said. So I called the number and Amanda answered. And it turned out that she worked for McCann, the global ad agency. And at first she didn't believe I didn't know anything about advertising. I literally got into the job because I had a degree in political science and I happened to have studied political advertising in that. It was accidental. Long story, got the job. First day on the job, I'm a librarian. What am I going to do? The 2 people that hired me sat me down and said, Dave, now that you've joined us, great. What are you going to do? I said, I don't know. They said, we don't know either. And I literally did not have a job description for 17 years after that.
17 years.
17 years. So I was very lucky.
Okay.
What happened was I literally took on what used to be called a corporate librarian's role. And a corporate librarian in those days wasn't just about collecting books and magazines. What would literally happen is we had about 300 staff across these 5 offices. And if they were working on a pitch for a new business or they had a client who wanted to get a new ad campaign out, somebody would call me and say, Dave, what do we know about the ice cream market? Now, instead of just handing out books and magazine articles, what they meant was, Dave, can you read everything and write a 3-page summary of what we know about the ice cream market? That grew. So that was that's market research. That is literally the basis of all good market research. And so I did that, but quickly over the next couple of years, I was Sent overseas to train to be a strategic planner, got to know people in key markets around the world that were in market research, coordinated the market research for our company in Australia, built a new program of qualitative research that basically involved me doing lots and lots of small scale focus groups, if you like literally we would say, Cynthia, we were looking at mostly teenagers. So I'd find Cynthia, a nice 16-year-old girl grown up in the suburbs of Sydney, and I'd say, next Thursday, can you get 2 of your friends to go around to your house? And I would literally sit in your bedroom with your 2 friends. I know this don't think this sounds weird, and we would have a very open-ended conversation. I would literally be looking at the posters on your walls and what records you had. There was no set agenda to the questions. It was literally me every week doing these small-scale interviews with small groups, mostly of teenagers, to understand young Australia. After 9 years in Australia, the company asked me to move to Asia to set up the same type of platform across the whole region. We had 23 offices, I think, across Asia Pacific. So I then set up that program across 13 countries, 23 offices. And for the next 13 years, every week, we did these very loose focus groups across all sorts of age groups in all these cities across the region. So I like to say it was the longest continuous mass qualitative program that the world has ever seen, which allowed us to go back. Sorry?
I agree with you. I think it's the longest.
By the way, the McCann office
very
is in Brazil.
unique.
Very unique, but for a few years, for example, the McCann offices in Brazil did the same thing.
Yeah.
We had the system at one point set up in about 40 countries around the world. And what that allowed me to do was to take all of that and present back to clients, global clients and local clients. Look, this is the way in which people in your country at different ages think. This is what matters to those people as people. And very much the focus was not on which ice cream do you buy and why do you like that flavor. It was what's important to you in life. And then we would figure out what out of that would make a difference to our ice cream client. So it was very indirect research, very open research, but very powerful. And that allowed me to rise up through the ranks and get different titles and stuff. And then in the course of all that, I got much more involved with the market research industry. I lived here in the 90s in Bangkok. I set up the Market Research Society of Thailand. I established that. I became a member of different SMR committees, organizations. I was on the Research World editorial committee for 10 years. I acted as IX and Green Books ambassador to Asia, all sorts of things, working with the industry, trying to people on broader aspects of what market research would be. Does that make sense?
Yes, a lot of sense.
And by the way, and in the course of that, I got to live here in Bangkok, lived in Hong Kong, lived briefly in China, 10 years in Japan, then back to Hong Kong. And then 10 years ago, I left McCann. My wife and I moved back here to Bangkok, and I've been a freelance consultant ever since, around Asia, Europe, a little bit in South America. Very famous. Very big project, very interesting project for what's one of Brazil's most famous brands.
There are many, but
footwear.
Footwear. Olympicos or
Havanas.
Havana. Okay. We don't call it footwear. We don't call it.
That's part of the problem. Anyway, it was a very interesting project.
It's not footwear.
It was an interesting project.
For you, I think it's flip-flops or thongs.
In Australia, we call them thongs.
Thongs,
very confusing.
Yes.
Very confusing to Americans. We call them thongs, and
But
Havanas
are not footwear. Footwear is something else.
Oh, okay. Whatever you say. You're the expert. You're from Sao Paulo. What would I know?
That is amazing. You said you spent a lot of your career explaining the Asian market to Western countries and Western marketeers. What were the things that you told them about the Asian market?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Unfortunately, I am linguistically challenged. I barely speak English.
I disagree.
And by the way, I'm putting on my posh accent. Back where I grew up in western suburb Sydney, if I talk like this, they think I'm an English tourist. But I'm married to an Italian who speaks a few languages. My kids grew up speaking multiple languages. But the funny thing is, when people would ask me, what do you actually do? I'd say, I'm a sort of translator. And they go, how many languages do you speak? And I go, one. But what I do is I speak many cultures. And I was lucky that in high school, I focused on Asian history. I went through a couple of degrees, but one of my degrees, political science. I looked at a lot about cultural differences in politics, but also political theories from different countries. And I've always been very interested in history, religion, cultures. So when I moved to Asia, one of the first things I figured out was that my primary job was to help our big international clients understand the region, sometimes in depth within specific countries. And of course, I would have lots of people working for me or lots of contacts that get into the real details. Sometimes the questions were as idiotic as, look, we've got this campaign that we're going to launch in Korea. Can we launch that in India as well? And you go, no, you just can't. Things like explaining the geography, the cultural differences, the religious differences. No offense to anybody, but an awful lot of Europeans, a lot of Latin Americans.
Even physical differences, right, Dave?
Right.
Because in India, if you see a commercial with Korean people in India, it makes no sense.
No, but one of the things is that in the 90s, the early 2000s, even till quite recently, you'd be amazed at the people that come from the West who basically don't have any real sense of the geography or the religious or the cultural differences. So sometimes I would literally have to explain things like what's the difference between Buddhism and Hinduism and why there were certain things that you could do in certain countries, etc. Sports was a big part of it. Sports is an easy analogy. Now, coming from Sao Paulo, it's very easy for me to talk football to you, right? And I grew up in a football family, so fantastic. But when I'm talking to Brazilians or Americans, for example, and I've got to explain cricket and explain that cricket is actually the second biggest sport in the world, right? Most people don't realize that in the West, but it is the second biggest sport in the world in terms both of the number of people that play it, the number of people that watch the major sport games, the World Cup, etc. It's the second biggest event after the Football World Cup is the Cricket World Cup.
Wow.
Trying to explain that. And so trying to explain that, look, if you're looking for sports sponsorships or you want to sponsor things in different countries, in Japan, Taiwan and Korea, go baseball, right? Football's a close second, okay? But baseball. Philippines, it's basketball. India, it's cricket. Australia, it's a whole bunch of things, right? And by the way, it differs by the state in Australia. So a lot of my job was doing that, but also using a lot of market research on the finer details. I'm really trying to understand what matters to people in Singapore that's different to what matters to people in Hong Kong, for example. And a lot of the years I lived here, those two cities were the two rivals to attract, for example, to attract Western companies as their headquarters in Asia. We're going to based in Singapore and Hong Kong. Here's the differences in cultural and politics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. China. I've been fortunate. I moved to Asia. One of the reasons I moved to Asia was to help establish McCann's first offices in China. So that meant having to recruit people, train people in China on how to deal with Westerners. I was lucky to, at exactly the same time I moved to Asia, you won't know this, but Coca-Cola did not exist in India for 17 years. The government chucked the company out of the country. I happened to arrive in Asia just as they were allowing it back in. Coca-Cola was my company's biggest client globally. So part of my job, my first 3 years in Asia, was to help relaunch Coca-Cola in India, which was an amazing, you would take Coca-Cola for granted. I grew up in Australia, we take it for granted. It's always there. But imagine if literally nobody in your family, in your town, your city had been able to drink it for 17 years, right? And so I got lucky with some of those things, and then having to explain, but going into the details, why would people want to drink this, or why would you want to launch this product there, etc. And a lot of that was understanding more than just doing a survey. It was understanding the real background of what was going on.
It's amazing. Is there any funny story that you can share with us about people from different regions of the world doing something in the region that You talked about like communications, misplaced communications, and products that we take for granted. But is there any funny story you can share?
Well, a lot that I could share if we were just having a drink in a bar. But one of the most interesting things for me was I got a phone call one day. When I was living in Tokyo, and I got a phone call from one of our most senior executives in New York who said to me, it was a Tuesday, and he said, "Dave, you have to be in Shanghai on Thursday." Well, what? Yeah, Thursday morning, there's a meeting you have to be at. But you do realize that's a different country, right? The reason for the meeting was that one of our global clients had just appointed somebody as the new regional director for Asia. And he decided that he was going to be based in Asia, in Shanghai. And so one of our executives in New York had heard this and arranged for me to have 20 minutes to explain Asia to him. Now, imagine if you had somebody from the other side, from, I don't know, China, fly to South America, and you were told you got 20 minutes to explain the whole of South America to him, right? It's like most of us speak Spanish, the rest speak Portuguese. Other than that, it's difficult, right? It's even much more complicated in Asia. So what I ended up doing was I managed to get a flight the next day. I got there. And of course, like you, like all the people that would be listening to this, I had a laptop on the plane with 1,000 presentations. And I'm thinking, which one will I present? And in the end, I didn't present anything. In the end, what I did was I walked in, and I literally walked in, like, imagine this covered with a cloth, right? So I just walked in with something covered in a cloth,
Yeah.
introduced myself. He introduced himself. I said, look, thank you for giving me 20 minutes. And he goes, what are you going to talk to me about? And I took the cover off and I had a plate of rice. And I spent 20 minutes explaining rice.
Rice.
Yes, because if you think about it across Asia, from Pakistan to Korea down to Indonesia, the most common food is rice. Not every country and region is it the predominant carbohydrate. In some places it's wheat, but it's a basis for most countries in Asia. But then what I did was I explained how in different countries you eat it with a fork, with a spoon, with chopsticks, with your fingers. How do you eat those? And so I illustrated that. I explained how in different countries rice is eaten before the main course, with the main courses, or after the main course. I explained that in Thailand, there are 7 grades of rice. In Japan, there are 7 grades of rice, but the gradings have got nothing to do with each other. So I explained that they use basmati rice in parts of India. What does that mean? They use stickier rice in Japan. What does that mean? That conversation, instead of 20 minutes, went for an hour because the guy just kept on, this is great, just tell me more. And of course, what it allowed me to do is I talked about rice and the differences. It allowed me to talk about why is it that people in this part of the world eat rice this way, or there's different types of rice, and where did those cultural influences come from? And by the way, the guy was in the cosmetics business, so it has nothing to do with his industry, but he was just fascinated by, okay, so there's a big difference. There's a core commonality, but there's huge differences just in the most common thing. And that was to help him understand that, again, if you're launching lipsticks in different parts of Asia, you've got to be fully aware of lipstick has a role essential in all cultures going back hundreds and hundreds of years. But the way in which you might sell lipstick culturally is different in different marketplaces, the different representations, the different types of models you would use, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of those sorts.
I will tell you, I think you were talking about rice, and my husband is Japanese. I've been married for 17 years, and I'm still trying to manage rice with a chopstick. This is a challenge. It should be in the Olympics. So I haven't mastered it. My kids did, though. But I remember when I went to live in London, and Brazilian food is rice as well. You have rice in beans every day. And I went to London. The beans were completely different. I haven't had the Brazilian beans, but rice should be the same. I couldn't find any rice that worked like the Brazilian rice, but I read in a newspaper from the Brazilian community that the basmati rice was the most similar to the Brazilian rice. We would exchange information where to buy basmati rice,
where's the
how
Indian
to
grocer?
get what.
Yeah.
Yes, and what was the best brand and everything, because we really struggle with that. it's a completely different type of rice. Like we fry the rice with onions and garlic, whereas in UK, the rice is just boiled and
Boiled. Right.
you remove the water, which is completely different
Well,
from
look,
ours.
that's a bit, but my daughter was 3 when we first moved to Asia. My son was actually born here in Thailand. So they were raised in Asia. They both ended up going back to Australia to go to university. And they literally, the first thing they did when they got back to Australia was to buy a rice cooker because they couldn't understand how you could just have boiled rice. What is that?
Yeah.
And so,
why?
It's a good example. Rice is a good example. But there are, as I said, there's sports, there's all sorts of things, right? Mythologies, attitudes to beauty. And what does beauty mean, right? How do you see beauty? Where do you see? We once did a project where we asked women across about 40 countries, a whole bunch of questions about beauty.
Okay.
The most fascinating ones was we asked people in 40 countries, apart from your own country, where do the most beautiful women come from? And what was interesting was the number one answer in nearly every country was a country on the other side of the world. I remember that in Brazil, the answer was Sweden. Okay. If we asked a Japanese woman, they said France, for example, right? By the way, there was only one country that didn't say a country on the other side of the world. And that was the French, who said, so we can't say our own country. No, it must be Italy then, because they're the nearest to us. But everybody else said somebody on the other side of the world, right? And so lots of those sorts of things help put into context the way people think, the way they act, how you can think as simple. Are you going to use endorsers, celebrities? Who you use, which makes sense, right? And many a time I was in a World Cup year, as we're coming up to the World Cup, I was involved with a lot of clients who were major global sponsors, and they send this note about, we're going to sign up these guys as the key celebrities for the World Cup to use. And you go, yeah, that guy's really famous. Lionel Messi's famous everywhere. Not too sure about that guy. I don't think in Japan anybody knows who he is. It'd be that sort of thing.
Yeah, I can't believe that. This takes us to some kind of subject you talked about, like, what's the difference between market research and insights?
Market research is the things you find out. Market research is a process of trying to find out either answers to questions or confirmation of opinions. In my experience, most clients want the latter. They use market research to confirm things that they think they know. They're not really exploratory. But finding out findings from market research, and I've been involved in literally thousands of pieces of market research, qual, quant, all types. And some of it has come up with many great findings, but very little of it comes up with a real insight. So, for example, I was taught very early in my career by Australia's then most famous market researcher that an insight only comes about when you see 3 different findings from 3 totally different sources within a 48-hour period. And that sort of come together to make you rethink something altogether. So, for example, if I find out, do a very thorough piece of research, and I find out that 84% of office workers in Hong Kong feel a bit tired around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. This was once presented to me by, I'll say, Nescafe as, this is the insight we want you to use to create a new ad campaign. Oh, that's not an insight. That's a piece of information. That's no insight. By the way, you didn't know that beforehand? Why did you bother doing a piece of research to find that out? Too often, and I literally, while I was waiting to come online and talk to you now, I was just scrolling LinkedIn and all those things. And I saw a couple of references where people go, this great insight, blah, blah, blah. No, that's not an insight. That's a great finding from a piece of research. But it's not fundamentally different. It's not shaking my head around. I was taught very simply by a very famous American ad researcher that an insight is this. If it doesn't literally feel like a whack on the head, it's not an insight. If your response to, oh, that's really interesting, oh, I can use that, that's a great finding. It's not an insight. The problem with the market research industry is, and a lot of organizations now like to call themselves the insight industry. We're not, because there's a lot of other industries that parallel to us that do a lot of work that leads to insights as well, whether that's our business anthropological world, or whether that's my old world of corporate librarians, that's psychologists, psychiatrists, all sorts of people. but they all get sometimes to an insight, but they're very rare. I like to say I've now been in this business for 40 years, and I can tell you the 11 insights that I've come across in 40 years. I couldn't tell you the thousands of really interesting pieces. Only 11 insights in all those years.
Yeah.
There's only 11 times when I went,
But
wow, that really changes everything. That changes the whole way I think about this. And if it doesn't do that, and I don't mean a slice.
But even though when you talked about how you explained Asia with rice, I think that's a powerful insight. If I was a marketeer listening to this story, I think this tells me more about the culture and what you do with the countries than any research.
But that by accident, after I'd done it, I would count that as one of the 11. It wasn't something I planned months ahead. It was literally on a plane between Tokyo and Shanghai. So the rice thing was not something that I planned. It was something that sort of hit me when I was getting desperate about what I was going to talk about. Now, afterwards, after I'd done it and seen the reception, I realized, no, that sort of thing, when you take a tiny slice of life to illustrate a bigger point, and the way that's a great way, allows you to get to a bigger subject area. And that's an insight in itself, right? It was an insight to me about, rice can do that. And then later on, I became famous for doing the same trick with things like toilets and men's underpants and things like that. So where you take a very small, what seems meaningless subject, right? What we used to call mistakenly low interest categories, and explain that in a way so that people get the bigger picture of what you mean, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. This is more insights than any market research result that you've seen. And I'm curious about something else that we were talking before. What's the difference between people and consumers?
People is Cynthia. Cynthia is a person. Now, where this really came to life for me was in 1998, I'm living here in Bangkok. I was the president of McCann, Thailand. We had about 150 staff. And one day I said to them, next Monday, you don't have to come to work. Everyone can have the day off. What we're going to do is we're going to give just five questions. And we're going to tell you a street corner somewhere in Greater Bangkok. And you have to go to this street corner and you have to ask 5 different people these 5 questions. And then we're all going to come to work on the Tuesday. What else you do that day, I don't care. Then on the Tuesday, we're going to have a town hall meeting and everybody's going to hand in their bits of paper and we're going to discuss what we learned by doing those 5 questions. Now, it just happened that one of the young account managers that we had, a very good-looking young lady, he assigned her a certain street corner. The first person she saw coming around the corner was this 17-year-old kid, had rings in his ears, his nose, everywhere, whatever. Now, if you're a 17-year-old, I'm sure this is true in Brazil, right? It's certainly true in everywhere I've lived. If you're a 17-year-old guy and there's this very attractive woman, older woman, because she probably was about 23, 24, and there's an older woman saying, hey, could I have a talk to you? Well, what do you say? Yes.
You stop.
And she said, I've been told I have to ask you 5 questions. It's very easy. Just tell me whatever you think. Now, the first question said something like, as a consumer, what do you think of X, Y, and Z? But before she could finish the question, he said, stop. I'm not a consumer. I'm a person. Why do people keep on calling me these awful things? And when she told me that the next day, I don't remember what anybody else came back with. That was the one thing I took away. And that was a real insight. That was a true insight for me, which was people are people. We're only a consumer when we're acting in the act of consumption. And the example I always give is, for good or bad, in May this year, it will be 50 years that I have drunk at least 1 can of Coke every single day for 50 years. Every single day. I've worked on the Coca-Cola brand for 25 years, doing their advertising all across the region. I've been to Atlanta many times. Am I a Coke consumer? No, there's no Coke in the room I'm sitting right now. There's one in the fridge that I'll probably have when I'm finished with you. And for the 10 minutes I'm drinking that, I'm a Coke consumer. The rest of my life, the rest of my day, I'm Dave McCaughan. I'm a person. And the problem that I think most marketers and most market researchers make is we get too involved in the niche of the consumer behavior and not enough about what's important to Cynthia. So, yes, I use this hashtag people not consumers because if I think of I work with some of the biggest brands in the world. I work with some very big local brands across Asia. The most successful brands I ever know and have ever worked with, all are based on understanding people, not understanding consumers. If you think about Apple, Nike, Coca-Cola, or MasterCard, all those famous brands, L'Oreal, right? It's not about the product and the consumption and the usage of the product. It's about somebody has found out and figured out something really important about what matters to the people we're trying to target. So for Coca-Cola, it's simple. People want happiness. That's why it's called happiness within arm's reach. It's not a beverage. It's not a drink. It's happiness within arm's reach. That's why L'Oreal, 50 years ago, this genius woman at McCann in New York came up with this thought that all other cosmetics companies were basically saying, get beautiful to attract a man. What's important to you, right? What's important to you as a woman? And
Yes.
that changed the dynamic of not only that brand, but the whole industry. And so I've been very tough, and as I get older and crankier, more tough, people mistakenly using the word consumer. Oh, of course, what's happened is, you're too young to know this, Cynthia, but in the mid-90s, I could go to 10 meetings in a row and never hear the word consumer. It didn't get used.
Yeah.
It was used only in a very narrow sense. But then in the mid-90s, it took off. And then a lot of people, marketers and market researchers, unfortunately, are generally intellectually lazy people. So they fall for traps. And one of the traps was, this consumer thing. We must use consumers because it's trendy. And then politicians started using it. There's been a major political change in Australia the last couple of days with the leader of one of the big parties. And in his first speech as the new head of the new party, that's the number 2 party in the country, he started talking about consumers want this, people want policies that are going to help them, right? He's talking about, we must have, consumers want more babies. What? What are you talking about? People want more babies. So I'm very tough on projects I work on. I give a lot of lectures at universities and courses around the region, and I'm very tough on the way people use those 2 words, because we fall into that trap of, the problem with using the word consumer is, and I always refer to it as the dirty C word. And the dirty C word basically traps you into focusing on the wrong thing. You said before we started recording, it traps you into thinking about the armpit or the lips.
Yes.
It doesn't mean you're thinking about the person. And successful marketers understand people. Understanding that consumer behavior is secondary to understanding people.
I think it's an opportunity that a lot of companies miss out. For example, when you have huge companies like Unilever, for example, they have these insights teams for each of the categories, but they do the same surveys, the same research, the same qualitative research, but they are so focused on what do you eat, or how do you do your laundry, or what kind of deodorant you use, that they forget that it's the same person using all of those categories. And what you really should think of is how I can make these people value my brand and have all of my brands in all of the segments in their households. Instead of focusing, I want my deodorant, so I will attack this person with a lot of information about deodorants that they don't even care about. They don't want to hear about stinky clothes or being stinky. They don't want to hear that. They want the outcome. They want what makes them feel good. And it can be like all their beauty care, all the things they do with their laundry.
Most of my career, I'm lucky. I've worked on nearly all of the major toothpaste brands in the world at different times. And what 99.9% of people, when they pick up their tube of toothpaste and put it on the brush, they're not thinking about oral care. They're not thinking about having healthier teeth. If they're thinking about it at all, it's, my breath smells fresh, or my teeth look whiter, or something like that.
I feel good because of
so the whole oral care category really has got nothing to do with actually healthier teeth. It's got to do with self-consciousness. It's got to do with personality. It's got to do with, can I get the kiss, right? Literally, that's where the idea of fresher breath in your toothpaste came from, was the understanding, the desire that insecure guys who smoked too much wanted something to get rid of the stink so that the girl wouldn't reject them. These are big things, and this is the stuff that brands and categories are really built on.
Thinking about technology, most specifically AI, how does it help us to understand? How do you see AI shaping the way we get insights, actually?
Okay, I've been lucky. When I set out on my own 10 years ago, the first big project I was asked to do by a client happened to be for Shiseido in Japan. But they were looking for some answers about international marketing, and we didn't have much money or time. And fortunately, somebody introduced me to an AI platform, which you would now call an LLM, right? And this platform basically worked in nearly every country of the world, in every language. And what you would do is you'd basically say to it, okay, so here is 30 key terms in the beauty world, and I want to look at Brazil in Portuguese. And it would find every single piece of content on the Brazilian internet ever read by anybody in Brazil in Portuguese. And it would analyze that to tell us which of those terms was most important, which were growing and likely to grow in the future, grow in importance, what was the emotion around them. This was all 10 years ago. So the technologies have been around, and by the way, that technology was already 5 years old when I got onto it. So this is not new. One of the great things that I think people are overlooking is that we're both involved with organizations that look at the future of the insights industry, the misnamed insights industry, the market research industry. And a lot of the discussion is the effect on qual and quant. But what people aren't talking about is the amazing effect that this is having on what you might call desk research, or you said data analytics. It's about taking the millions of pieces of content that are already out there and using that to help you understand what the world really thinks, what they're reading, what they're understanding, what they're liking, etc. So this is not social media monitoring. This is looking at everything, right? And this is the value of it. Social media monitoring, okay, a bit limited because basically it's about who brags the most brags and who curses the most curses. So social listening, useful a little bit in helping you understand what the people that are saying something are saying on particular mediums, that most people don't say much. Most people don't put down things. And by the way, we all know that everybody has a different personality on each social medium. But what these giant LLMs are able to do is to look across all the content. So not just the social media, but all the articles that are written and published, all the academic articles written and published, all of the textbooks, all of the websites that are publicly available, and all of the content on those. Put that all together, analyze that, and that gives you a much bigger view of, for example, what Brazil thinks about category X, right? Or product X or brand X. Now, you used the example before of Unilever. Unilever was a client of mine for many years. I worked on 2 or 3 different categories. And like you, I would be amazed that I'd be working on the ice cream category, but I'd also be working on, another category. And I'd have teams working on those 2 categories, and my own teams weren't talking to each other, but the client's teams never talked to each other. And they certainly never shared market research between each other. So sometimes I would be sitting in meetings and going, that's really interesting, Hong Kong, yes. So you'd realize that the team that's literally across the hall that works on a different category did research last month into what mothers in Hong Kong think. Oh, yeah, but they did it about washing detergent. We're talking about ice cream. Okay. No, but they also included questions about family and lifestyle and things like that, right? And their children. When I'm going, don't you think you should cross over to learning? And more importantly, the thing that used to frustrate me the most was I would go to some of the big, and I won't name them, the biggest market research companies in the world. Companies that had 100 offices and were doing literally thousands of studies every year across all sorts of categories. And my big complaint was, I don't understand why you guys insist on doing new qual and quant research. You've literally done 50,000 studies in some way about mothers across 50 countries. Now, you should be able to dump all that data into one place and from that analyze for any category what mothers think. Right? What's important to mothers, not specifics about the laundry detergent or particular ice cream, But what matters to mothers? And that's, oh no, we can't do that. Why not? Because that would be like we were sharing information from different sources across different things. What they really meant was that their financial model depended on doing qual and quant study.
Yes.
But they should have been employing more librarians, more analysts, and now more LLMs to do that work. Now, we're starting to see that in some organizations, and it's starting to improve. And that's really the future. We're going to have the impact of AI on qual and quant, and there will be some improvements. We know that qual and quant are becoming more efficient, they're cheaper, but that happens with every new technology. It becomes more efficient, it becomes cheaper. How will it help us really understand deeper? Will only come when we use it across studies, not within a study. Because it's only when you get across studies that you get to an insight. You'll never get to an insight within a study. You'll get findings that are relevant to what you asked. But across studies and across thousands of studies is when you start to get real insight into what really matters to people, to different types of people, different age groups of people, different ethnicities, cultures, et cetera, et cetera.
I still get this from clients when I do consultancies here in Brazil. Clients come to me and say, I don't have any data. And then when I sit down with them and I explore, there are like 10, 15 reports they have done in the past year that they don't know how to integrate or how to extract insights. So I used to actually get those reports, read all of them, like long before the large language models. And I would read all of them with my pen, circling things that were common. And in the end of the day, I would have 10 insights to give back to them. And they were like, but you compared this sample with that sample. It's not comparable. And my view of this is that it's not about, and it makes no sense because I've, at least in 25 years working in research, I learned that even when you have strict samples, like strict places where you get those samples, the questions of the tracking don't change and everything remains the same. You still have results that you cannot explain after a new wave, and you end up making the map because that's it. You don't have anything to tell what is behind those shifts in numbers, and you have to make up a story. But in the end of the day, the thing is people change, people think differently. And the more we try to make them generic, we lose the real opportunities that are on the surface. So I'd rather compare 20 things from completely different sources. Some of them might be skewed towards something or skewed towards another thing. But then my experience and my reasoning will bring them together and make something out of it. Something that will really change the needle, move the needle of the business.
Right. The strange thing to me, Cynthia, is obviously in the market research world, for example, you and I would both know lots of people who are more intelligent, no offense to you, but more intelligent than us. The people that have done more advanced degrees, for example. And I always use the analogy, look, you've got a doctorate. Yeah, okay. So in your doctorate, you must have written a thesis paper, 20,000 words. And you had to have a bibliography where you read a whole bunch of stuff. I had 200 citations, different things I cited. What's the difference between that and I need to sell more ice cream? So you go out and find 200 citations and create a thesis out of that. Look, there's nothing wrong with doing qual. I still do qual work sometimes. I get involved with analyzing other people's quant work. It's just frustrating because too often, halfway through the project, I will literally discover, but didn't you do some research like this 6 months ago? And you're telling me that the beer market in Australia has changed that dramatically in 6 months? I don't think so. Or why aren't you looking at the aggregated studies that you've done more? I just think it's partly my own professional background, but it's also partly because I can't believe the wastage that goes on in not doing better analysis of what we know.
And what I felt like working in corporate CMI teams also is that everyone that arrives, I don't know if it's to prove a point or by simply laziness. They're like, we need to do a lot more research. We don't have enough data. And then you do a bunch of new stuff without even looking through the past
Yeah.
reports that you
But
have. Now it's much easier. My first job, I had this cupboard full of paper reports that I had to read, like really get. There were some insects living in the reports, and I had to read them. Now you just press a button.
let's just
So
press a
I
button.
don't
But you know,
understand
the problem
this.
is it's a bit like every time there's a new brand manager, we've got to have a new campaign. One of the things that amazed
That's
me
it.
when I first got into the advertising world 40 years ago, the first couple of years, every January I had to ask my co-workers, I don't understand this. Why does the client need a new campaign in January? Because it's the beginning of the year. Yeah, but what's wrong with just running the old campaign? And of course, somebody would come up with some ridiculous number, whatever. But it was really driven by the fact, and every
Yeah,
2 years, for
it's
example,
wear out. I remember wear out was something big
yeah,
back like 10 years ago.
but a lot
And I
of the
was like,
wear outs.
it doesn't wear out.
No, that's right. The wear out said the thing that we'd always end up saying is, look, the truth is, if you're the brand manager, or if you're the account manager, or if you're the creative director in the ad agency, you've seen the ad 2,000 times. You're sick of it.
Yes.
But Cynthia has seen it, Dave.
5 times.
And you know what's interesting is because now we have all this theory about constant presence, et cetera, et cetera. If you keep on radically changing it, people get lost. It's interesting. I think it's just got to do with people feel that they're in a job, therefore they must do something different. And
Yeah.
that means you've got to have a new piece of research, et cetera. And it's wasteful. But more importantly is that sometimes you would see, we need a new piece of research. Do you really need that piece of research? Or are you just making up that need because it makes you feel good? Like
You have the
older
budget
guy,
for it.
yeah, older guys wearing those sort of glasses, they're a tricky customer. Really? I don't think so. You can't complain in some ways because me, and most of the people that are ever going to watch this have made a living out of this. It is what it is. But it's just unfortunate that, and then go back to your AI question. To me, it's just unfortunate that, as I said, I've been using these AI platforms for about 10 years. For the first 7 years, I would go to conferences all over the world, SMR, IEX conferences, and I would present case studies of how I've used these platforms to solve major issues for clients. People would very politely sit in conference rooms all over the world and sit there and politely go, oh, AI sort of. And as I walked off stage, at every single one of them, I'd hear somebody saying, yeah, but it's not real market research, it's using AI. And so, because it wasn't qual and quant, right?
Yes.
And so that's starting to change a little bit, right? But we need to be thinking, and we need to think more about, with qual and quant, not just how to make it more efficient, et cetera. And yes, there will be new AI platforms that can do more emotional analysis, et cetera, all those sorts of things. We now got some interesting platforms with automated moderators, AI-driven moderators, et cetera. That's all great. But the role of the market researcher is has always been, as we've introduced new technologies, is to think past what the new technology is going to offer. When we first introduced telephone surveys 30 years ago, right? This changed the dynamic, right? Then we had internet-based surveys. Then we had COVID, and we suddenly had all the focus groups were being done on Zoom, right? And most of them were awful focus groups. I sat through dozens of focus groups during COVID, and they were nearly all useless, right? And they were useless because it was basically just me as the moderator asking you, and then asking you, and then asking, and there was none of the stuff that focus groups are supposed to do. So until people started to figure out, no, what we've got to do is things like the moderator leaves the Zoom room and just leaves the 5 panelists sitting there, and then they start talking to each other. Like, well, where'd he go? What did he do? And that's when you find out the interesting stuff, right? So we need to be thinking about that. We need to be thinking about how to do things differently. You know, recently, with a friend of mine out here in Asia, we came up with a couple of hashtags, and one of them is hashtag different or dead. If you're a market researcher and not doing things different now, you won't have a job in 3 years' time. You've got to be different. You've got to be, I keep on using the term, be weird. You've got to be weird in some way, right? If you're not weird in the way you do the research, analyze the research, deliver the research, talk about the research, then why is somebody going to pay for Dave instead of paying for Tony down the road or anybody else.
Yeah.
The value comes from doing things differently. Value doesn't come from copying and pasting the technology that makes it cheap and fast. Anybody can do that now. My friend Craig here in Thailand uses the term the great flattening. He says AI is the great flattening. And that's what it is at the moment.
I think if you were doing insights and real insights today and market research, if you're a researcher and you are not bothering people, somehow people are not feeling uncomfortable with what you present or what you deliver, maybe you're not doing it right the way it should be done.
Exactly. I know. This is, by the way, that's always been the case, though. All of the really good market researchers I've known in all these decades I've been working in the industry were people who got in front of an audience, whether it was in front of a chairman of a company or a marketing team of a company, or whether it was in front of an audience at an industry event, and they made people squirm. They made people go, that guy's weird, right? Literally, like sometimes it was just their physical, the way they did it, right? The way they expressed it. Sometimes it was the way in which, look, when I started out, everybody put up literally overhead flimsy charts of very bad pie charts and bar charts, right? And Hans Rosling came along about 25 years ago. Hans Rosling taught us how to do animated statistical presentation. And it was like a revolution, right? This weird guy, Swedish, or I think he's Swedish, it was Swedish. This weird guy gets up and he's got these YouTube videos and we're all going, that looks amazing. Wow. Yes. Why weren't we doing it? Right. And it's the same again. And my latest bugbear is, I'm fortunate enough, I get asked to speak at about 20 conferences every year, all sorts of industries, not just market research, all sorts of industries. The thing, the bugbear the last 2 years is that, first of all, it doesn't matter what the conference is, if there's 20 speakers, 17 of them will somehow force the term AI into their presentation, even though it may have nothing to do with whatever they're talking about. But the other bit is that if there's 20 presentations, probably about 12 to 15 of them use some AI to create their charts. So they all look the same. And there's no individuality, there's no uniqueness, there's no weirdness. And we need to, as an industry, understand that the most valuable asset that you have is what makes you weird and how you use that to add value.
Yeah, I completely agree. Let's get to our final round of questions. You talked a bit about this already, but just to wrap up, favorite research methodology, research or insights?
That what is commonly called secondary research, because it's not second, it's always the thing you do first. So it should be primary research or desk research, it's sometimes referred to, because it's my background, partly because I think it adds the most value. It's the most likely to get you to something interesting if you do it properly. It used to be, as you said, extremely time consuming. You and your cupboard full of reports and worms in the paper and all that sort of stuff. But now, as you said, we can automate this. You know, when I wrote a thesis paper at university, you know, it would take me a month to read the 50 articles and books or whatever, right? Now you can have a platform that can do all of that for you literally in minutes. And then you can ask the questions to delve deeper. Did it get it right? You can do it across different platforms to compare the answers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's no excuse for not doing more of that. And that's the exciting part. I've always liked doing, I think I've moderated probably 1,000 focus groups myself. I like moderating focus groups, but I like it mostly because I like arguing with people. And if you watch me moderate a focus group, there's usually an argument involved, right? All forms of research or interest. Semiotics is fascinating. I don't understand why more people don't use more semiotics to understand what matters to people in their lives. Anthropology is great. Behavioral economics. Yeah, I know there's a lot of ups and downs, but it's provided some really interesting points of view. A mixed bag of techniques is what's really important.
Yes, I think it's not about quant or whatever. It's how you mix the best resources you have in a way that you can actually extract things from it.
Yeah, exactly.
And what's the coolest trend, innovation, anything in the area right now?
In Asia?
It can be in research or in Asia. What is going on?
Well, the coolest trend happening in Asia, and I think it's impacting the West now, is we've seen the rise of Chinese brands in the last few years.
Yep.
And in this part of the world, I don't know Sao Paulo, but in this part of the world, if I went out on the street today, probably the most common cars I would see would be Chinese. In Australia last year, my home country, last year was the first year where Chinese brands became the most sold nationality of cars in the world, in the country. The same here in
My
Thailand.
car is Chinese.
But it's happening in more and more, right? But what's interesting,
Yeah.
the big trend at the moment, are you in Brazil, are you seeing the trend for these 20-second drama series? So these are, it's come from China. They are drama series you watch on your phone, all right? So they're all made vertically, not horizontally.
Okay.
And you literally, each episode is only 20 seconds. And there might be 1,000 episodes to a show. And they're drama shows, they're romance stories, rom-coms, all that sort of stuff. But they're in 20-second episodes. 20 seconds flip, 20 seconds flip, 20 seconds flip. And this has become a huge trend, not only watching the original Chinese ones, and so we've seen actually the growth at language schools of people getting interested in learning Mandarin again, simply so they can follow the Chinese in their original language. But we're also seeing that being copied. And here in Thailand, the Philippines, a lot of other marketplaces, people making local drama series, rom-com series, etc., in the same manner, using the same techniques, etc. And this is the new wave. Remember when Korean dramas were a big hit around the world 15 years ago?
I've watched a few in Brazil.
So Korean dramas really took off in the 90s, Asia, in the early 90s, and then started to spread around the world. It became a big thing. Korean boy bands became very big, etc. Pink Black is one of the biggest bands in the world the last few years. Now the Chinese have now got into this, that yes, they can sell cars, they can sell refrigerators, etc., but what they need to sell is soft power, Chinese culture, and the Chinese way of doing it. And so they're developing these new mediums, if you like, that are changing the dynamic in the way in which, admittedly, younger people, mostly, more and more people are watching this stuff. If you get on the train line here in crowded Bangkok every day, every carriage is packed and people are standing there with their phones in front of them, flicking through episodes.
Wow. I will look into that, see if we have them in Brazil. I haven't heard about this.
Yeah, so this is huge. This is huge. And then in market research, I think in market research, the biggest trend is obviously the adoption of AI. But one of the interesting things for me is the way in which some people are now starting to think about not so much the automation of qual and quant, but the depth of analysis. And so the next challenge is going to be, how do you do more qual, quant, semiotics all combined in the one thing? And seeing some technologies that are starting to do a bit more of that. So we talk about qual at scale, but qual at scale is that's just deeper quant. That's all it is. Not real qual, it's deeper quant. But for example, we all know, during COVID, if we were doing this, at least one of us, maybe both of us, would have a fake background. Now, I'm pretty sure that you're sitting in front of a real bookshelf, right, in your home or whatever, right?
Yes.
Yes. And I'm sitting in my little study at home, in my apartment here in Bangkok. I refuse to allow people to use those backgrounds on anything, because I'm more interested in the background than I am in looking at you.
From my background, you know everything about me. I'm a huge fan of Star Wars.
You're a massive Star Wars fan, and to that I congratulate you. Well done. But doing
that's why you know.
But doing that is so important. And a number of times in the last couple of years, I pointed out to people, look, you can do all this now and you can have an automated moderator and all that sort of stuff now. That's fantastic. But is the automated moderator asking at some point, Dave, what's that picture behind your shoulder? Why is that there? Cynthia, is that your kids, or are you a Star Wars fan?
It's me. They don't like Star Wars. Yeah, it's me.
But see, these are the really interesting things, right?
Yeah.
So, because then you go in, and what we should do if we're running a focus group would be, I would spend the next 10 minutes just talking Star Wars to you and to the rest of the group, and using that as a leverage. Then you'd say, yeah, but we're supposed to be asking about lipstick. Yeah, but we'll get back to that. That's less important than finding out what makes this very attractive Brazilian woman really into Star Wars. Makes her smile like that? It's the interesting stuff. And that's the stuff that you can really use as a marketer. Not how many times a day do you apply your lipstick.
And what would be a piece of advice you would give to young people entering the insights market or communications markets?
My advice to every student that I talk to, no matter what the subject, no matter what the course,
Yeah.
no matter what the industry is, read more history. You can never read enough history. Simple example, just yesterday, a fairly well-known commentator on the marketing industry in America wrote a piece, and I wrote back and said, no, about purpose in marketing. Right? I said, no, you don't understand. Purpose has been part of marketing as far back as we can remember.
Yeah.
When Pompeii was covered in volcano stuff, right? The most famous, no, seriously, the most famous brand in Pompeii, right, was a particular brand of garum. Garum was the fish sauce they put on everything. And the most famous company in that city was a brand of garum that was sold all over Italy, right? And as the most trusted brand of this particular type of product, that you could trust the taste, that you could trust it wouldn't poison you, you could trust it would last, right? Now, this is all purpose, right? We've seen this again and again. The problem is, I find, is that most people don't even study the history of their category, let alone history of the culture they're trying to sell to. And so spend a lot more time looking at history. Nothing is new. Everything has been done before. You just need to go and find it and figure out how to update it again.
Reinvent the wheel, right?
Stop pretending you're reinventing the wheel.
Thank you so much, Dave. That is awesome. I love talking to you. And thank you so much for being part of our podcast. For those listening to us today, we talked to Dave McCaughan from Thailand, and he gave interesting perspectives about how he's a translator of many cultures. He gave some real examples of how he translated the Asian culture for Western markets through rice or through sports. And we also talked a lot about insights and the difference from market research results. And he talked about what are the coolest trends in China or in Asia and everywhere. Thank you so much, Dave, for being with us. It was a real pleasure.
No, it was great. I hope in Bangkok or I'm in Sao Paulo soon, one or the other. Okay, so.
Yes, I'm often in London to see Mike as well, so maybe we can catch up in
sort of halfway between. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Something like that. But hopefully we can meet very soon in person. And I want to thank everyone listening to the Insight from Elsewhere podcast and invite you all to subscribe to Insight platforms to get all news about the industry straight into your mailbox every week. See you in the next episode. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.